Many people will probably be disgusted by the thought. But what advantages and disadvantages would there be if we ate insects instead of meat, for example? I would like to point out right at the beginning that there are also vegan diets, and that studies indicate that insects can also feel pain. Therefore, this should be taken into account, and this video is unbiased with regard to the personal eating habits of each individual. Likewise, no food or type of diet is given preference in this video. Welcome to Erklärwürdig, worth explaining. First, let's look at water consumption. Did you know that producing 1 kilogram of beef requires around 15,000 liters of water? The majority of this is used for growing feed, watering the animals, and processing. By comparison, the production of 1 kilogram of insects, such as mealworms or crickets, requires only 1,000 liters of water or less. The reason for this is that insects require much less feed and can be converted into edible mass much more efficiently. This gives us incredibly high water-saving potential. Let's stick with our beef example. Global consumption of beef and veal in 2024 was around 60 million tons. If we were to replace this amount with insects, we would save an incredible 840 trillion liters of water. To put this into perspective, this corresponds to the annual water consumption of around 1.5 billion people, if we assume around 1,500 liters per person per day. Please do not confuse these values with drinking water consumption in households. But switching to insects brings many other advantages. Insects need significantly less space. Large areas of pasture are needed for meat production, and a lot of space is needed for growing feed. Insects can be bred in vertical farms, which saves a lot of space. Even urban cultivation would be possible. Insects can convert 80 to 90% of their body weight into edible mass. In cattle, this figure is only 40%, and in chickens, around 55%. Insects have a high nutritional content and are rich in proteins, unsaturated fatty acids, vitamins, and minerals. Cattle have a very long life cycle. It takes years before they are slaughtered. An insect, on the other hand, goes through its life cycle in days or weeks. This makes insect breeding much cheaper and also takes less time. Many species of insects are already eaten around the world. But before anyone gets the idea of picking insects from a tree or the street, it should be mentioned that insects can also transmit diseases and thus be harmful to humans. People can also have an allergic reaction to eating them. Most countries will have food safety authorities, so unless the insect species in question has been declared safe, it's best to stay away from it. There are some challenges and disadvantages that should be considered when breeding and feeding insects. While insects are traditionally eaten in many Asian and African countries, there will be cultural reservations about eating insects in many Western societies. There are also psychological barriers, as insects are often viewed as unappetizing and disgusting. A broad marketing of insect foods in these societies is therefore rather difficult in the short term. People's perceptions would have to change over a longer period of time. As with other animal foods, there is a risk of transmission of pathogens that could potentially arise in insect breeding facilities. Hygienic safety standards must therefore be ensured in breeding and processing. The possibly unnatural feeding of the insects and the addition of antibiotics and pesticides could have negative effects on human health. The high protein levels of many insects could also be destroyed and therefore no longer provide such high nutritional value. Although insect farming requires less space than meat production, it can also consume a lot of energy through the use of heat lamps and lighting. Animal welfare should also be taken into account in all considerations and evaluated scientifically and ethically. Ultimately, the question is how we deal with scarce resources on our planet and sustainably maintain humanity's food supply in the coming decades. Feel free to subscribe to our channel for more knowledge-based content and leave a like.